The morning sun filtered through the curtains of my modest apartment in suburban Brooklyn, casting a warm glow on the kitchen table where Jamal's school papers lay scattered. At 42, I'd built a life that felt steady, if not always fair, a single black woman raising a bright 10-year-old boy while juggling my role as CEO of Morgan Education Holdings. But I kept that part quiet. In my world, revealing power too soon often invited more scrutiny than respect. Today was about Jamal. His grades from the public school were stellar, straight A's in math and science, a knack for STEM that made me proud. Richmond Academy, the elite private school on the Upper East Side, seemed like the perfect next step. I'd emailed ahead, confirmed the appointment, and now, dressed in a simple cream business skirt and blouse, I drove my understated Toyota through the bustling New York streets. The academy's white brick facade gleamed under the clear Monday sky, a symbol of privilege I knew all too well. I parked in the visitor lot, grabbed the folder of documents, transcripts, address verification, everything pristine, and walked toward the main office. My heels clicked softly on the polished stone path, and I felt the familiar weight of eyes following me. Not hostile, not yet, but assessing. Who is she? Does she belong? Inside, the air smelled of fresh coffee and old money. I approached the reception desk, smiling politely. The young white woman behind it looked up, her professional grin fading almost instantly as she scanned me from head to toe. Sorry, ma'am, but we don't see parents without appointments today, she said, her voice clipped, already turning back to her computer. I kept my tone even, pulling out my phone to show the confirmation email. I do have one. Clarice Morgan, for the transfer application. I was asked to bring additional address proof. She glanced at the screen, then at the paper I handed her, nodding reluctantly. But before I could relax, a door swung open from the back. Miss Whitmore, the assistant principal, blonde hair perfectly coiffed, name tag gleaming, stepped out, arms crossed. Miss Morgan. I'm afraid there might be a misunderstanding. We believe this institution may not be the best fit for your family's circumstances. The words hung in the air like a veiled slap. Circumstances. Code for my black skin, my lack of flashy jewelry, my absence from their social circles. My heart raced, but I stood tall, refusing to let it show. I stood there, the folder clutched in my hands like a shield, as Miss Whitmore's words settled over me like a cold fog. Circumstances. She said it so politely, with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes, but the meaning was clear. My skin, my address in Brooklyn, the fact that I didn't arrive in a Mercedes or with a designer handbag, those were the circumstances that suddenly made Richmond Academy feel out of reach for my son. I drew a slow breath, keeping my voice steady. I'm not sure I follow. Jamal's academic record is excellent. He scored in the 98th percentile on his standardized tests. I've submitted everything you requested, transcripts, recommendation letters, proof of residency. What exactly makes this school not a good fit? Whitmore tilted her head, as if I were asking something unreasonable. Well, Miss Morgan, our students come from families with certain foundations. Shared experiences, you understand. We've found that children from different backgrounds sometimes struggle to integrate. It's not personal, but we have to consider the community as a whole. The words stung like a slap disguised as concern. I felt the heat rise in my chest, memories flashing, job interviews where my qualifications were questioned, stores where I was followed, restaurants where the service was suddenly slower. But this wasn't about me. This was about Jamal, my bright, curious boy who dreamed of building robots and solving equations. He deserved better than to be dismissed before he even had a chance. Around us, the waiting area had gone quiet. A few parents, mostly white, dressed in tailored coats and expensive scarves, glanced over, then quickly looked away, pretending to check their phones. One woman whispered to her companion, "Poor thing, probably thought this was a public school." The words were soft, but they carried. I met Whitmore's gaze again. "So, you're saying my son's qualifications don't matter because of where we live or how we look?" She hesitated, then smiled tighter. "I'm saying we have limited spots, and we prioritize families who align with our values." I nodded once, slowly. No argument. No raised voice. I simply bent down, picked up the papers that had slipped from my grip in the moment, and stacked them neatly. My hands didn't shake, even though inside I felt something crack, a small fracture in the armor I'd worn for years. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing it. I paused for what felt like an eternity, though it was only a few seconds. The office air thickened around us, charged with the unspoken weight of her words. I could feel the eyes of the other parents boring into my back, their silence louder than any accusation. But I didn't snap. I didn't raise my voice or demand justice right there. Years of navigating spaces like this had taught me that anger was a luxury I couldn't afford, not if I wanted real change. Instead, I nodded slowly, forcing a neutral expression onto my face. "I understand," I said, my voice calm and measured, like I was discussing the weather. The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but I swallowed them down. No pleas, no arguments. Just acceptance on the surface, while inside, a quiet resolve hardened. I bent down to gather the scattered papers, Jamal's glowing report cards, the meticulously filled forms that now felt like wasted effort. My fingers moved deliberately, stacking each sheet with care, as if reorganizing my thoughts along with them. This wasn't new. I'd faced doors slammed in my face before, subtle rejections wrapped in politeness. But for Jamal's sake, I wouldn't let it break me here. As I straightened up, folder in hand, I met Miss Whitmore's eyes one last time. Not with fury or defiance, but with a steady, unflinching gaze that pierced through her facade. It was the look of someone who knew more than she let on, who had seen this play out 100 times and come out stronger. She faltered for a split second, her smile twitched, her posture shifted uneasily, as if sensing the storm brewing beneath my composure. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door, my steps even and unhurried. The receptionist avoided my gaze, fiddling with her keyboard. Outside, the sun still shone brightly on the pristine campus, mocking the chill that had settled in my chest. But as I reached my car, I felt it, a spark of determination igniting. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't rush out of the building. My steps were deliberate, echoing softly in the marble-floored lobby as I made my way toward the exit. The weight of Miss Whitmore's words still pressed on me, but I held my head high, refusing to let my posture betray the storm inside. As I passed the waiting area, the whispers started, subtle at first, like a breeze rustling leaves, but they grew louder, impossible to ignore. A man in a sharp Armani suit, probably waiting for his own child's meeting, leaned toward the woman beside him. "Did you see that? She comes in here thinking she can just waltz into Richmond. Looked like she was applying for a janitor position or something." His voice carried that faux discreet tone, the kind rich folks use when they think no one's listening, or when they don't care if you are. The woman, her pearls gleaming under the chandelier lights, shook her head with a pitying sigh. I overheard, "Her kids from a public school in Brooklyn. Can you imagine? Our children have been prepped since preschool. If they start letting in anyone, the whole standard drops. It's not about money, it's about fit." Fit. There was that word again, echoing Whitmore's rejection. I paused near the door, pretending to check my phone, but really absorbing every syllable. Their words weren't just gossip, they were ammunition, fuel for the fire I felt building in my chest. How many times had I heard variations of this? In boardrooms, at galas, even in grocery stores. But hearing it tied to Jamal, it cut deeper. Inside the office, through the partially open door I just exited, I caught snippets of Whitmore's voice. She wasn't whispering. "That's handled," she said to the receptionist, loud enough for the staff to hear. "People like her don't belong in our process. It disrupts everything. Make a note to screen emails more carefully next time." The receptionist murmured agreement, her earlier reluctance gone. I could picture the scene, Whitmore straightening her blouse, satisfied with her gatekeeping, while the others nodded along, complicit in their silence. The isolation hit me then, standing in that opulent space surrounded by people who saw me as an intruder. The polished floors, the framed alumni photos, all of it screamed exclusion. My anger simmered, not explosive but focused, like a laser. I wouldn't let this slide. Not for me, not for Jamal, and not for every other black parent who'd faced the same invisible barriers. This Sangtrong world thought it could dismiss us, but it had no idea the power I held. I slipped my phone back into my bag and pushed through the door, the whispers fading behind me. But their echoes? Those would drive me forward. I lingered in the academy's grand hallway, not quite ready to leave this battleground. The whispers from the waiting area still echoed in my ears, but I pushed them aside, focusing on the bulletin board ahead. It was plastered with flyers touting Richmond's commitment to diversity and inclusion, glossy photos of smiling students from various backgrounds, slogans about equity in education. The irony burned in my throat like acid. How could a place that preached openness slam its doors so firmly on someone like me? A teacher hurried past, her arms full of folders, glasses perched on her nose. She was white, middle-aged, with the harried look of someone buried in lesson plans. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, I decided to plant a seed. I didn't shout or accuse, that wasn't my style. Instead, I spoke just loud enough for her to hear, my voice calm but laced with quiet edge. "It's fascinating how a school that champions diversity and inclusion can exclude from the very first interaction," I said, gesturing vaguely at the board. "All those words on paper, but in practice." She stopped mid-stride, turning to face me with a startled expression. "Excuse me?" Her tone was polite, but there was a flicker of curiosity, or perhaps unease, in her eyes. I smiled faintly, not aggressively, just enough to hold her gaze. "Just an observation. I've seen the curriculum here emphasizes empathy and cultural awareness. Yet, for some parents, the welcome mat isn't rolled out quite the same way." She shifted her weight, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. The hallway was mostly empty, but voices from nearby offices carried faintly. "I'm not involved in admissions," she stammered, but her cheeks flushed. "But if there's an issue, you could speak to." "No need," I interrupted gently, waving a hand. "I'm sure it's all part of the process." I turned back to the board, pretending to read a flyer, but inside, satisfaction bloomed. Words like that didn't vanish, they spread like whispers in the wind, especially in a place like this where gossip was currency. She hesitated, then nodded awkwardly and continued on her way, but I caught her glancing back over her shoulder. "Good. Let it linger. Let her wonder." I knew how these institutions work. The grapevine was swift, and a single comment could ripple through staff meetings, planting doubt. My power wasn't in confrontation, it was in subtlety, in forcing them to question their own biases without realizing I'd orchestrated it. As I finally headed toward the exit, the spark of resolve grew brighter. This reminder was just the beginning. They thought they'd dismiss me, but I already started turning the tables. As I turned away from the bulletin board, the teacher's retreating footsteps faded into the hum of the academy's distant chatter. My reminder hung in the air like an unspoken challenge, and I could almost feel it taking root in her mind. But I didn't linger to see the effect. There was no need. Words like those had a way of spreading on their own, especially in a place built on whispers and reputations. I adjusted my shoulder bag, a simple leather tote, nothing flashy, and continued down the hallway toward the exit. The strap had shifted during my encounter with Whitmore, and as I walked, the zipper caught on my sleeve, tugging it open just a fraction. I felt the cool air brush against the contents inside, but I didn't stop to fix it right away. Part of me, the strategic part, honed from years in boardrooms where every detail mattered, knew this accident could serve a purpose. A janitor was mopping the floor nearby, a black man in his 50s with a weary but kind face. He paused his work, rag in hand, as I approached. Our eyes met briefly, a silent nod of recognition in this sea of exclusion. Then, his gaze dropped to my bag. The zipper had widened enough for the light to catch on something metallic inside, my executive access card from Morgan Education Holdings. The gold-embossed logo gleamed subtly, Cloris Morgan, CEO, etched in fine script, with the company's seal promising entry to the highest echelons of educational investment. He froze, his mop handle tilting slightly. "Ma'am." He started, his voice low and hesitant, as if unsure whether to speak. His eyes widened, piecing it together, the name, the title, the quiet power it implied. In that moment, I saw the shift, surprise turning to respect, perhaps even a spark of solidarity. He knew what it meant to be overlooked, to clean up after those who dismissed people like us. I smiled faintly, zipping the bag closed with deliberate slowness. "It's all right," I said softly. "Sometimes things slip out when they're meant to be seen." He nodded, a small grin breaking through, but said nothing more. As I passed him, the air in the hallway felt different, charged, like the first rumble of thunder before a storm. No one else had noticed yet, but that card was my first breadcrumb, a subtle reveal that would unravel their assumptions. Tension built in my chest, not fear, but anticipation. They thought they'd send me packing, but I'd just left the door crack open for the truth to flood in. That afternoon, as I drove back to Brooklyn, my phone buzzed with a notification from an anonymous email forward, one of my quiet contacts in the education network, someone who'd slipped me intel before. I pulled over at a coffee shop, heart pounding, and opened it. There it was, a screenshot of Miss Whitmore's internal memo to the admissions board at Richmond. Subject: tightening screening protocols, it read. In light of recent inquiries from unsuitable candidates, I recommend we refine our initial vetting process. Some individuals misunderstand our institutional ethos and could disrupt our cohesive community. Effective immediately, flag any applications lacking aligned family profiles for immediate review. Aligned family profiles. The phrase twisted like a knife. It was code, plain and simple, for wealth, for whiteness, for the invisible barriers that kept people like me out. But Whitmore didn't stop there. The forward included snippets from a parent group chat, where she'd apparently leaked details. "We had a pushy mother today, insistent on enrolling her public school kid. Handled it, but let's stay vigilant. Our kids deserve a stable environment." Pushy. The word echoed in my mind, a slur dressed up as concern. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles whitening. How dare she? Jamal wasn't some disruption. He was brilliant, eager, deserving. And me? I'd built an empire funding schools like hers, pouring millions into STEM programs for underserved kids. Yet here she was, painting me as an intruder. By evening, the rumors had snowballed. Another alert pinged, post on a private Richmond parents forum, anonymous but traceable to Whitmore's circle. Heard about the woman who stormed the office today? Acting entitled, like she owned the place. From Brooklyn, no less. If we lower standards, what's next? Replies piled on, totally agree. Our tuition pays for exclusivity. Admin needs to lock down access, no more walk-ins from outsiders. Outsiders. The tension coiled tighter in my chest, a mix of rage and cold calculation. This wasn't just personal, it was systemic, the kind of gatekeeping that crushed dreams before they started. Whitmore was escalating, turning her bias into policy. In a staff meeting note attached to the forward, she'd proposed new rules: limit campus access for unidentified visitors. Require pre-approval for all non-standard inquiries. It was a fortress mentality, designed to exclude. I sat in my car, staring at the screen, the city lights blurring outside. My blood boiled, but I channeled it. This was the peak of their arrogance, the moment before the fall. They'd poked the bear, thinking I was harmless. But as CEO, with stakes in Richmond's parent company, I had the leverage. The storm was coming, and Whitmore had no idea she'd summoned it. The next morning, I woke with a clarity that cut through the fog of yesterday's humiliation. My phone had buzzed late into the night with more forwards from my discreet allies in the education sector, people who'd seen enough barriers to know when one was being erected. Whitmore's memo had spread like wildfire, igniting hushed conversations in staff lounges and parent forums. But I sensed the tide shifting, doubt was creeping in, and I knew it wouldn't take long for cracks to appear. I didn't have to wait. By mid-morning, as I sipped coffee in my home office overlooking the Brooklyn brownstones, another message pinged, a detailed account from an insider at Richmond. It was about Mr. Thomas Hale, a veteran teacher in his 60s, the kind of educator who'd been there for decades, teaching history and spearheading the school's STEM outreach programs. Apparently, in the chaos of the previous day, a copy of my application had been left on the communal photocopier, Whitmore's oversight, no doubt. Hale had spotted it while making copies for his class. The insider described how he'd paused, frowning at the name, Clarice Morgan. Something clicked. He slipped into his cluttered office, the one lined with faded posters of civil rights icons and shelves of dog-eared textbooks, and fired up his computer. A quick search on the school's database, cross-reference with public records, led him to my profile on the Morgan Education Holdings website. There I was, CEO and founder, architect of multi-million-dollar grants for STEM initiatives in underfunded districts, partner to elite institutions across the East Coast. Hale leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Clarice Morgan, he muttered to himself, according to the report. The woman behind the equity funds we've been begging for? And they treated her like that? He sighed deeply, the sound heavy with regret. In his years at Richmond, he'd seen the school's glossy facade hide uglier truths, subtle exclusions, whispered biases. Now, dismissing the very person who could transform their programs. Hale pulled up emails from past grant applications, ones he'd helped draft, pleading for partnerships with organizations like mine. The irony hit him like a freight train. They've humiliated the powerhouse funding half the private schools in New York, he whispered, shaking his head. The insider noted how Hale sat there for minutes, staring at the screen, before closing his laptop with a resolute click. He didn't confront Whitmore, not yet. But the seed was planted. Word would spread through the faculty grapevine, eroding her authority from within. As I read the message, a quiet satisfaction warmed me. The tension peaked, their fortress was crumbling. They thought they'd fortified against outsiders, but I'd already breached the walls. Now, it was time for the review. The day after Mr. Hale's quiet revelation, I returned to Richmond Academy, my resolve as sharp as a blade. I didn't bring Jamal's application this time, no transcripts, no proofs. Just a slim envelope tucked into my bag, sealed with the weight of truth. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, but the air felt heavier, pregnant with impending change. I parked in the same visitor spot, walked the same path, my cream skirt swishing softly. This time, though, my steps carried purpose, not supplication. The lobby hadn't changed, the same polished floors, the same cluster of parents waiting with their lattes and laptops. I spotted Miss Whitmore almost immediately, hovering near the reception desk, directing a staff member with that authoritative clip in her voice. She saw me approach and straightened, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded irritation. "Miss Morgan? I thought we'd concluded our discussion yesterday." I met her eyes evenly, pulling the envelope from my bag. "I only need 30 seconds of your time. If not, I'll forward this officially to the board." She hesitated, glancing around as if seeking backup, but no one intervened. The receptionist busied herself with papers, avoiding the scene. Whitmore took the envelope with a reluctant nod, her manicured nails slicing it open. As she unfolded the letter inside, her face drained of color. I watched the transformation, the confident tilt of her head faltering, her lips parting in silent shock. The document was straightforward, a formal notification from the parent company's acquisition team, announcing my appointment as an honorary member of Richmond's governing board. My name in bold, Clarice Morgan, CEO of Morgan Education Holdings, alongside details of the recent state purchase that gave me oversight on operations, including admissions. Whitmore's hands trembled slightly as she reread it. This must be a mistake," she whispered, but her voice cracked, the authority gone. I said nothing more. No gloating, no accusations. I simply turned on my heel and walked away, leaving her rooted in place. But as I passed the waiting area, a woman in pearls from yesterday, leaned forward, having overheard the exchange. Her eyes widened as she pieced it together, whispering urgently to her companion, "They just turned away the woman who could rewrite this entire school's policies. She's on the board now, did you hear? They dismissed her like she was nobody." The words rippled outward, a murmur spreading through the room like wildfire. Heads turned, phones were pulled out discreetly. The bureau had shifted in an instant, not with a shout, but with a single envelope and the quiet power of revelation. As I stepped into the sunlight, the tension that had built for days crested, breaking over them like a wave. They had no idea the floodgates I'd just opened. The morning after I left Miss Whitmore standing speechless in the lobby, my phone lit up with a forwarded email from the Academy's administration. I was in my Brooklyn kitchen, pouring coffee, when it arrived, an official announcement blasted to every faculty member, staff, and board affiliate at Richmond. Subject: Introduction of new honorary board member. My name leaped off the screen, Clarice Morgan, CEO of Morgan Education Holdings, appointed as an honorary governing board member with oversight on strategic operations, effective immediately. I set the mark down, a quiet thrill coursing through me. This wasn't revenge, it was recalibration. The acquisition had been in motion for months, my company's strategic buy-in to the parent conglomerate that owned Richmond's chain. I'd kept it under wraps, but now, with the timing perfect, the truth was out. The email detailed my credentials, founder of equity funds that had injected millions into private education, architect of STEM scholarships for underrepresented students. It ended with a call for an emergency meeting in the fourth-floor library that afternoon, all department heads and key staff required to attend. I arrived early, parking in the same spot as before, walking the familiar path. No skirt this time. I wore a tailored pantsuit, simple and professional, my bag slung over my shoulder. The lobby felt different, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. The receptionist glanced up, her eyes widening in recognition, but she said nothing, just buzzed me through without a word. The library was a grand room, lined with oak shelves and long mahogany tables, sunlight streaming through tall windows. Heads turned as I entered, no entourage, no fanfare, just me. The principal, a stern man in his 50s named Dr. Ellis, stood at the head of the table, flanked by department chairs. Whitmore sat toward the back, her face pale, avoiding my gaze. Hale, the veteran teacher, caught my eye with a subtle nod of respect. Dr. Ellis cleared his throat, calling the room to order. As you've all read, we are welcoming Miss Cloris Morgan to our governing board. Her expertise in educational equity will be invaluable as we navigate our future initiatives. Murmurs rippled through the group, surprise, confusion, a few gasps. One administrator whispered to another, the same Morgan from the funding proposals. No one dared question my presence now. The power dynamic had flipped, the woman they'd dismissed as unsuitable now held the reins. I took my seat calmly, feeling the weight of their stares, but inside, satisfaction bloomed. Justice wasn't loud, it was this, walking back into the room they'd tried to bar me from, unassailable. The room fell into a hush as Dr. Ellis gestured for me to stand. I rose slowly, feeling the collective gaze of 24 faces, administrators, teachers, board liaisons, pinning me in place. Yesterday, I'd been an outsider here. Today, I was the center. The air hummed with unspoken questions, a tension so thick it pressed against my skin. Whitmore shifted in her seat, her fingers twisting a pen, eyes fixed on the table. The board chairwoman, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s named Evelyn Hargrove, whom I'd met briefly during the acquisition talks, took the podium. She adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to formally introduce Miss Cloris Morgan. As CEO and founder of Morgan Education Holdings, Miss Morgan has revolutionized access to quality education across the East Coast. Her funds have supported over 50 STEM programs in private and public institutions, benefiting thousands of underrepresented students. Gasps rippled through the room. Hale nodded knowingly, a small smile tugging at his lips. He'd pieced it together already. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances. The Morgan grants, one department head murmured. We've applied for those twice. Hargrove continued, her voice steady. With our recent partnership through the parent conglomerate, Ms. Morgan now serves as an honorary board member with advisory oversight on curriculum, admissions, and equity initiatives. Her expertise in fostering inclusive environments will guide Richmond toward even greater excellence. The shock was palpable. Dr. Ellis's face flushed, he hadn't known the full extent until now. A younger administrator whispered to her neighbor, she's the one funding the diversity scholarships we brag about. Whitmore's pen snapped in her hand, the crack echoing like a confession. She looked up finally, her eyes meeting mine, fear, regret, and dawning realization all mixed in. I stepped forward when Hargrove invited me to speak. Thank you, I said, my voice clear and composed. I've dedicated my career to breaking down barriers in education, not just with funds, but with systemic change. Richmond's mission aligns with that: diversity, inclusion, excellence for all. But true alignment means practicing what we preach, ensuring every child, and every parent, feels valued from the first interaction. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading. Heads nodded tentatively, a few faces reddened with shame. Power revealed itself not in volume, but in this quiet authority. They saw me now, not as the unsuitable mother, but as the falsehood shape institutions like theirs. The reversal was complete, the truth laid bare. Inside, I felt a profound calm. This wasn't just my victory, it was for every overlooked voice. I stood there, the room's silence wrapping around me like a cloak, as Hargrove stepped back from the podium. The weight of revelation hung heavy, whispers turning to outright murmurs, faces paling as connections clicked. Dr. Ellis adjusted his tie nervously, avoiding my gaze, while Hale leaned forward, his expression one of quiet vindication. But my focus sharpened on Whitmore, seated at the far end of the table, her earlier poise crumbling like dry clay. She clutched the arms of her chair, knuckles white, her face a mask of forced composure cracking at the edges. The pen she'd been twirling earlier lay forgotten, ink bleeding onto the notepad before her. I could see the calculations racing behind her eyes, the memo she'd sent, the dismissive words she'd spoken to me, the barriers she'd erected now exposed as fragile illusions. I turned toward her deliberately, the movement drawing every eye in the room. The air thickened, anticipation building like a held breath. "Miss Whitmore," I said, my voice soft but resonant, carrying across the polished wood. "You mentioned yesterday that my son might struggle to integrate here, that our circumstances didn't align with Richmond's community." She froze, her cheeks flushing a deep crimson, lips parting but no sound emerging. The room shifted uncomfortably, a few administrators glanced away, suddenly fascinated by their notes. I continued, unflinching. "I'm not here to demand an apology or to settle scores. But let this be a reminder, true education isn't about exclusion masked as selectivity. It's about respect, seeing potential in every child, regardless of their background or their mother's appearance at the front desk." The words landed like quiet thunder. Whitmore's shoulders slumped, her eyes dropping to the table. She opened her mouth again, perhaps to defend or deflect, but only a faint stutter escaped. I didn't realize." Her voice trailed off, swallowed by the silence. No one came to her aid, no supportive murmurs, no interruptions from Dr. Ellis. The power she'd wielded so casually yesterday had evaporated, leaving her exposed, diminished. Hargrove cleared her throat, steering the meeting forward, but the damage was done. Whitmore sat there, deflated, the architect of her own downfall. Inside, I felt no glee, only a profound sense of justice, a quiet affirmation that my path, paved with resilience, had led here. This wasn't just about me or Jamal, it was a crack in the system, a lesson etched into the room's memory. As discussions resumed, I sat back, the tension easing into resolve. They'd learn, one way or another. After the meeting wrapped up, with Hargrove's closing remarks still echoing in the hushed library, I gathered my notes and stood. The room's energy had shifted, awkward handshakes, murmured thanks, eyes darting away from mine. Dr. Ellis offered a stiff nod, his earlier authority diminished, while Hale caught my arm briefly, whispering, "Well done." Whitmore remained seated, staring at her hands, a shadow of the woman who'd dismissed me so casually before. I didn't linger for pleasantries, there was no need. I said what mattered. I stepped out into the hallway, the same one I'd walked yesterday as an unsuitable outsider. The polished floors gleamed under the afternoon light filtering through tall windows, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward freedom. My heels clicked softly, a rhythmic echo of finality. No one stopped me this time, no receptionist demanding proof, no Whitmore blocking the path with veiled judgments. Instead, a staff member passing by paused, offering a tentative smile. "Miss Morgan," she said, her voice laced with newfound respect. I nodded, but kept moving. The air felt lighter, cleansed of yesterday's tension. As I passed the reception desk, The young woman behind it glanced up, her eyes wide, then quickly looked away. The bulletin board loomed ahead, its flyers on diversity now reading like ironic relics. I paused for a moment, tracing a finger over one slogan, Inclusion for All. A quiet laugh escaped me, not bitter, but triumphant. They'd built this place on exclusions, but I'd walked through their barriers unscathed. Outside, the sun warmed my face as I crossed the lawn to my car. The campus buzzed with students, laughing, rushing to classes, oblivious to the shift I'd just orchestrated. In my chest, a profound peace settled. This wasn't about vengeance, it was reclamation. I entered as a mother fighting for her son, left as the architect reshaping their world. Jamal would get his chance, but more than that, others like us would too. I slid into the driver's seat, glancing back at the white brick facade one last time. It no longer intimidated, it yielded. With a deep breath, I started the engine and drove away, the road ahead open and clear. A week passed in a blur of meetings and grand reviews at my office in Manhattan, but Richmond lingered in my thoughts like an unfinished chapter. I hadn't pursued any formal complaints yet. Instead, I let the revelation simmer, knowing institutions like that unraveled from within. Then, one evening, as I scrolled through my feeds while Jamal did homework nearby, a notification popped up from an education forum I monitored anonymously. It was a post on Richmond's internal alumni and staff page, shared widely enough to leak into broader networks. The author was anonymous, but the voice felt familiar, perhaps Hale or another teacher with a conscience. I've witnessed the shortest, most impactful conversation of my career, it began. A mother dismissed at the front desk because she didn't fit, judged by appearance, by assumptions about her background. Turned away like she was intruding on sacred ground. The post detailed the encounter without naming me outright, but the details were unmistakable: the pushy black woman from Brooklyn, the veiled rejections. Then came the twist. Little did they know, she was Clarice Morgan, the CEO funding equity programs we've chased for years. In one envelope, she exposed the hypocrisy. No drama, no demands, just quiet power that made the board bow. Comments flooded in. This is why our diversity initiatives feel hollow. Time to audit admissions, bias isn't policy. A parent chimed in, my kid's in STEM thanks to her grants. How could we treat her like that? The thread sparked debates on fit versus fairness, with links to articles on systemic exclusion in elite schools. I leaned back in my chair, a smile tugging at my lips. Jamal glanced up. What's funny, Mom? Just grown-ups learning a lesson, I replied. Inside, satisfaction bloomed, not vindictive, but affirming. This third-party voice amplified what I'd started, turning my personal slight into a catalyst for scrutiny. Whispers became calls for change. The forum buzzed with proposals for bias training, revised protocols. Richmond's facade cracked, and through it, light seeped in. For the first time, I felt the ripple effect beyond Jamal and me, toward every overlooked family. The discussion spread, a quiet revolution I'd ignited without raising my voice. A month later, the crisp autumn air filled Richmond's auditorium during the opening ceremony. I sat in the front row, not as a board member this time, but as a mother, Jamal beside me, his small hand fidgeting with his new uniform tie. The stage was adorned with banners proclaiming, "Excellence through inclusion," words that now carried real weight after the ripples from my revelation. Dr. Ellis stood at the podium, his voice steady but humbled, introducing the year's theme, Respect in Education. Then came the surprise. He cleared his throat and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Before we begin, I'd like to share a letter from one of our community members, a reminder of why we do this work. He began reading my handwritten words, the ones I sent anonymously but knew would find their way here. I don't expect special treatment for my son. I only hope he isn't judged by the color of his skin or the neighborhood we call home. When we teach children about respect, remember, they learn it from how we treat one another, from the front desk to the boardroom. True equity isn't a slogan, it's action. The auditorium fell silent, the words hanging like a gentle fog. Parents shifted in their seats, some nodding thoughtfully, others averting their eyes, perhaps recalling their own whispers. Whitmore, now reassigned to a lesser role, sat in the back, her face unreadable. Hale caught my eye from the side, offering a subtle thumbs up. As Alice finished, applause broke out, slow at first, then building. Jamal squeezed my hand, his eyes wide. "That's what you wrote, Mom," he whispered, pride shining through. I nodded, pulling him close. The image etched itself in my mind, a black mother and son, hand in hand amid a sea of privilege, no longer outsiders but symbols of change. The ceremony continued, but those words lingered, a resonant echo challenging the old ways. Richmond wasn't transformed overnight, but the seed was planted. Discussions on bias training, revised admissions, scholarships for Brooklyn kids like Jamal. For me, it was closure, not triumph over one slide, but a legacy for every child who'd follow. As we stood to leave, sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating our path forward.